So in our last session, we talked about bonding with our children through words, and we read a couple of verses, one of the main one being life and death are in the power of the tongue, which may explain why the pen is mightier than the sword. And so just to recap one thought from that session, if you didn't hear it, we don't want to go through this whole process of homeschooling, which is wonderful. We love our children, but it is very, very hard. As Rick Green said, it requires investment, but that part of that investment is sacrifice. So we've sacrificed a lot to homeschool our kids. Let's not ruin all the good that we've done by using words that bring death to our children instead of life. Let's don't kill a positive homeschooling experience, in other words, with our words. So we want to be very careful about how we speak to each other. I mean, we can have fun and things can be spontaneous. We want to be careful that the words we use are life-giving. In the same way, we want to teach our children how to be life-giving through their writing. Now, this is going to be a little bit different than some of the other sessions this week. Miss Oberly and Beth Kofer both did writing classes. I have not had a chance to listen to the first one yet. Like you, I'm going to be listening to sessions all next week by some of my favorite people that I just couldn't listen to this week. But I did interview Beth Kofer about the English 11 program. And it was so interesting to hear her talk about the 4 different phases of writing: planning, drafting, revising, and proofreading, and publishing. So all of those things are so important in an academic setting. I want to take you a little bit below foundational to the academic part of writing and just talk about how from the very beginning of school, and if your kids in 12th grade, it's not too late. My husband always says there's 2 times to plant an oak tree, today and 20 years ago. And so for those of us who didn't do it 20 years ago, we'll do it today. So we want to get beneath the writing process and make a pact with ourselves that we are not going to argue and scream over writing and editing. It's so easy because we feel ill-prepared to teach it, and sometimes we don't know what we're doing, and our kids are intimidated by it. So instead of the drama and the trauma of writing, we want to replace it with bonding. So I would say we want to collaborate on ideas and bond, have them write, help them as long as they need it and bond, and then revise, which may be the hardest part of writing, and even bond through that. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that. I want to give you just a little bit of my background. I homeschooled for 21 years, and my children, sometimes no thanks to me, are all great writers. My oldest son is a salesman, and words just flow out of him, but he was not a willing writer. We really, until he was a senior in high school, we were still doing writing assignments together. Now, he had a couple of courses where he had to do a lot of writing, but I gave him a lot of help. And then something just clicked with him when he was a senior in high school, and it was all of a sudden his ability to write and express himself that took him through college. He's very bright, but can't do time tests. And so a lot of times when kids were taking a test, he'd be writing an essay. And he has this voice when he writes, this ability to write his thoughts that's very powerful. So don't give up on your kids who aren't writing when they're 6 or 10 or 12. Continue to love them through the process. My second son, John, is a great writer too. He's an attorney. And so a lot of his writing is legal writing. And I can remember one time they were playing golf in our field in the backyard, just hitting golf balls. And his older brother, Ty, hit him hard in the back with a golf ball. It was an accident, but it still hurt. And John wrote this paper about the velocity of hurling projectiles at certain speeds and why they hurt. So that was how John wrote. But he loves the Lord. He reads the Word a lot. And so he has this very deep writing that comes from him as well. And then my daughter, Lizzie, she's an executive producer now with a large affiliate, a news station. And her thing when she was growing up, she was the most creative writer I have ever seen. I am not creative. Creativity when I write does not flow from me. Now, the Lord has given me more creativity as I think it was beaten out of me in school, honestly, to tell you the truth. But the older I get, the more creative I've become in my writing. And I'm not saying it's a great gift of creativity, but I really appreciate the Lord doing that for me. So Lizzie, she won, many essay contests in high school, won several thousands of dollars. And I was trying so hard to give her a solid grammar background too. I really love linguistics and grammar and the technicalities of writing. I couldn't get Lizzie to care two hoots about that, but she's doing this beautiful creative writing. And so it was real funny when she went to college. One of her professors, Dr. Hurlow, I will love this woman for as long as she lives and I live, just mentioned one day in class, if you learn how to edit, you can always have a freelance job. You can always make money. And so from then on, it was just like all the things we had done grammatically clicked with Lizzie, and she became this great grammarian and writer, and she'd always been a good writer. So it's just interesting. The Lord's going to take your children on different paths as writers, is my point. And all people say that you let your kids write what they're interested in. Publishers will tell authors, write what you know. So now let me tell you a little bit about my professional experience as an author and editor. I worked for Broadman and Holman Publishers from 2002 to 2006. They wanted to develop a homeschool product line. So this was my first foray. Well, I had done professional writing for websites before and been an executive editor for 2 websites at their educational portion of that, but I'd never been involved in print publishing. So this was a new experience for me. And as I was working with authors, it was so interesting, some of the things I learned that I wished I had known as a parent. Excuse me. We still have a good bit of pollen here. And my throat's tired from the week. I'm very sorry. So the things I learned as a professional editor were things like professional writers discuss everything. They collaborate about everything. Now, this was news to me because I was educated in the 70s at, high school and college. And if you got help with a writing assignment, unless it was a specific lab somewhere, which I usually didn't need, if you talked about a writing assignment with somebody else, it's plagiarism and cheating. Now, I'm not encouraging anybody to plagiarize. I don't mean that. But once I stepped into the roles of an executive editor at a publishing house or a senior editor, all the rules changed. I talked to my authors about everything. What's your idea on this? What are you thinking about this? I would look at their strengths and weaknesses as a writer. Here, let's focus on this, or I really like this idea, but this other idea isn't working so well. Tell me what you meant when you were writing about that. Help me understand better. So we would collaborate on what would work. We would talk about how do you keep your target audience in mind? Who are you writing this to? What are you really trying to say? How do you keep your reader reading? Those types of things. And so it's the job of the editor to enter the writer's world, be immersed in the writer's world so you can help them and help your writers learn new and better ways of saying things. You can tighten up the writing. You can help make it more effective. And really, there are several kinds of professional editors. There's the acquisition editor who helps acquire the author or the manuscript on a particular topic. Sometimes you want a particular author, sometimes you want a particular topic. And then there's a developmental editor that works with the authors in just that way we were talking about. Chapter by chapter, you're going over ideas. You're going through every sentence. Is there a better way to say this? Why this word? Why not this word? And I would say that developmental editing, and you can call it line editing, substantial editing. They're all different kinds of words. But for the purposes of this talk, we're going to call it developmental editing. Developmental editing is about 80% of the process. Now, we think of editing as proofreading, correcting grammar, correcting spelling, fixing errors, that types of things. But really, that's just the very tip of the iceberg. And that's sort of where we have most of our fights with our kids. So in the professional editing world, you throw away the red pen. The editing part, the proofreading part is totally non-emotional, and there's no crying. So I often tell parents, if that kind of editing is causing great angst in your home, pay a college student a stipend just to edit your child's work, or learn how to edit it together and talk through it without the red pen so that they're learning. I had a granddaughter who was at Clemson University. Oh my goodness, I love this granddaughter to death. And she had a great private school education. She entered our world later in life. And so when she went to Clemson, she would call me and she would say, Gran, I've got this paper due. What do you think? So she would send me the paper and we would talk through her essays line by line. I'd say, now, what are you trying to do here? Let's cut this sentence. Let's reverse this paragraph. What is your topic sentence? And it was interesting because we might spend 3 or 4 hours together just doing what somebody in a writing lab would do, something that I would have done as a professional editor for one of my authors. And then all of a sudden it clicked, and man, she was off. She is a great writer. And so I just want to encourage you that you can talk about writing. You can teach writing without the drama and without the tears. So one thing there are a couple of things I want to talk to you about in particular. I love this. Robert Frost was a 4-time Pulitzer Prize winner, and he said, all there is to learning to write or to talk is learning how to have something to say. So the biggest mistake I made when I was teaching the writing process to my children, I would look at what they were supposed to write on in the curriculum, or I'd say, you need to write a persuasive paragraph about something. And I felt like it was wrong to collaborate with them and help them learn what the assignment was about. Boy, I wish I could go back and do those days over again. I'm just so thankful in the Lord's grace. We talk about a lot of things in our home. You can tell we're all talkers. But I wish I could go back and say, okay, here's the assignment. We are going to work through this topic together. So if you had to write something on flying to the moon or about a science topic, let's say your kids are interested in the moon landing. First, have a conversation. What are you interested in? What would you like to write about along these lines? If there's dead silence, then you pick out 3 or 4 topics and bring them to the table. What do you think about this topic? What do you think about this topic? Well, that might have some possibilities. What do you think about writing about baseball? Well, I love baseball. And then you begin to talk about the topic within the framework of the assignment. What are you going to say about these particular things? Let's talk about this. We need to be like Robert Frost and help our kids have something to say and something to write. If they don't have anything to say, they don't have anything to write. And so we need to be constantly conversing. Now, if you have readers, it's really nice. If you have kids who love to read, some of mine did, some of mine didn't. And if you have kids who love to read, then they're reading constantly, and it's much easier than for them to write. But then other kids are more emotional, and they intuitively write. They're the poets or the persuasive writers. So you need to take your kids where they are and help them develop having something to say. So when you give them an assignment, don't feel like you just have to throw them into the deep end of the swimming pool or throw them to the wolves. You're going to say, here's our assignment. Now let's talk about it. And so the more you do that, the more writing will become pleasurable and you'll bond together rather than having unrealistic expectations like, here's your assignment. I want to see it in a week. I want you to plan, I want you to draft, I want you to revise, and I want you to proofread. And all of those things are absolutely necessary parts of the writing assignment. But we want to go about that in a way that really supports our relationship with our children and supports their ability to have something worth saying. Oh my goodness, I love listening to Beth Kofer. She was a homeschool mom for 12 years, and so much of what I'm saying, she says in terms of helping your children write. So I just want to encourage you, to not be afraid of collaborating with them. It is not cheating. If your kids are dysgraphic, it's like they're allergic to holding a pencil, dictate. Let them dictate and you write. I don't care how old they are. I can remember doing that for Ty when he was in the 10th grade. Then computers are becoming more, more and more access to that, and he would type. He always had a lot to say. It was just difficult sometimes to get it from his mind onto the paper. And then all of a sudden one day that hurdle's gone. And so just help your child write, and when he doesn't need any more help, he's not going to ask you for it. And so that it was just as I was in the professional world of writing that I began to understand these things. So I'm going to give you a few ideas of things you can do with your children in terms of writing assignments. Now, let me just tell you this before we get started with some specific ideas. There's some writing you need to edit, and there's some writing that just doesn't need to be edited and put into a final process. I really encourage children, students, anybody to journal, which is very hypocritical. I'm a terrible journaler. I never had time I went to public school, and I went to a very demanding school, very demanding college. So I never had time to do a lot of writing on my own. I was always doing assignments and involved in extracurricular activities, and I'd still be up studying all night. So with our kids, it's really great that we can give them the space to journal. All of my kids have journaled, which they did not learn from me. I mean, I hate to say that in public, but it's the truth. And as you have kids, especially in this COVID world, there's been a lot of research, and especially how hard it's been for teens. Let them journal about that. And if they don't want to journal by themselves, say, okay, you tell me how you feel and I'll write it down, or I'll type it while you speak, or let's talk about it together, and then you can go write down your thoughts. The idea about writing being healing and therapeutic is so true. Sometimes when you can get it out of your heart and your mind and onto a piece of paper, your problems seem a whole lot more solvable. I'm not sure why, except for it's left the nebulous world of thought and feeling. You've committed it to paper, and now you can do something concrete about it. Sometimes there's just value, like the psalmist, in telling the Lord how you feel about things. Lord, I am not happy about this. My anxieties are multiplying every day. Where are you, God? I mean, the psalmist said that so many times. David said that. The other psalmist said that. And so I would just encourage you to encourage your children to write those kind of thoughts. God is big enough to handle what they write. I heard Elizabeth Elliot say that at some points, and that was just amazing. So God is big enough, but then as your children journal, if you sense there's something wrong, ask them if they'll share their thoughts with you so you can talk through those things. Another way to bond. Lizzie told me one time, she said, Mom, don't read my journals when I leave home, because I only journal when I'm mad about something. So, I'm sort of glad she gave me that heads up. There's no way I'm going to pick up those journals. I don't want to know what she was mad about. I'm glad she dealt with it. I hope she dealt with it. And so that was a gift to me that she gave me. And one time I picked up my middle son's journal because I was worried about, I just felt like he wasn't happy. And I thought, well, maybe I need to read his journal. So he was writing something to the Lord, and it said something like, well, that didn't come out right. But, unless you're reading this when you're not supposed to, it's not going to matter. And so that was kind of a funny little thing. And we are still close enough to talk about it. So I just want you to know that there are all types of ways to bond with your children through the writing process. Now, here are some, we were talking about not everything needs to be edited. So I have to show you this little book Lizzie wrote us when she was, oh my goodness, look, all the pictures are falling out. When she was probably 9 years old, and she put in all these pictures and wrote poems. And, there was no way I was going to say, oh, Lizzie, you spelled that word incorrectly. Or did you know you didn't put a comma in the right place? It was a gift, and it was a wonderful gift. The other gift I've gotten in writing that has meant so much to me this year on my birthday, my 14-year-old granddaughter wrote me this text. Her mother about died because it was a text. It's like a 2-page letter telling me how much she loved me and why. I told my husband, I said, this is my obituary. Nobody else has to write a thing. So when I die, just put this in the paper. And but here's the thing. For me personally, I would never put a pen to any error on that page. It was a gift from her heart to mine. I told Joe if he uses it as an obituary, he probably needs to edit it. And so, there's the difference. Is it private or is it public? So here are some ideas, and we're going to go through these quickly, about things that you can do with your kids that are fun writing assignments. Teach them to write a tribute. I just happened to be listening to Dennis Rainey on Family Life Today, and he was doing a radio program, and he was doing a talk on how to write a tribute. So at the time, my daughter Lizzie, it was either in the, I think, 11th or 12th grade, and we were just doing this little writing guild with her two best friends. They were all really great writers. I have to say that. I had nothing to do with that. And but I listened to that tape. It was around Mother's Day, and I said, okay, girls, we're going to learn how to write a tribute. So together, we listened to that tape on how you write a tribute, and then I asked them each to decide who they were going to write the tribute for. And so I think because it was Mother's Day, they decided each to write one for their mothers. So I wrote a letter to my mother, who was still living at the time, because I wanted them to see how I would write a tribute letter. And then they said, I said, what do you love about your mother? So we talked about this for about 30 or 45 minutes, and they each talked about their mother. And so you would think it would be a little awkward with Lizzie there, my daughter. But, the interesting thing is Scripture says, honor your parent, honor your father and mother is the first commandment that ends in a blessing. If we want our children to be blessed, one of the first things we can teach them is to honor us. It's not self-serving. It's helping them obey that command that ends in a blessing. And so we talked about the tribute and how you write it. Every child needs to know how to bless other people with their words. So I would encourage you to ask your children, let's write a tribute to your dad or write a tribute to your grandmother. And then you can sit down and ask them questions like, what is something special you've done together? Or let's say it's the grandmother. What is something you've done with your grandmother? And what do you love about your grandmother? What character trait really speaks to you about your grandmother? Don't be afraid of humor. All my grandkids, they're great writers too, and they're funny because my husband is funny. So their dads are funny. And so they'll write me some really funny things sometimes. Humor is a great way to communicate, and it communicates that you know somebody and that you love them. Write a paragraph or two together. And and expounding on their ideas, and ask them if they want to use their laptops, that's fine. If they want to write on paper, that's fine. You don't want to put any barriers between them and the writing process. So now if you have little ones that are just learning to print, you do want them to learn how to do some handwriting. You do want them to learn how to write cursive. I know that's not popular today. And Lizzie was fussing at me one day. She said, I can't read cursive. She's this very well-educated person. You never taught me cursive. And so I went digging through all of her papers because I couldn't throw any of them away. And I sent her these papers that she had written in cursive. So that was pretty funny. But you just want to remove the barriers. Take the barriers away from your children. Put bonding experiences in and take the barriers out. And then if you're going to give the letter of tribute to the grandmother, then you're going to want to go through the revision process. And you can give them ideas like, well, maybe we could say this a little bit better. You don't want to change their heartfelt writing, but you will want to correct spelling, and you will want to correct punctuation, and you can help them do that. You can talk through it together. Now, this is why this needs a comma, and you can teach grammar in context, which is a great way to learn grammar. And so I would just encourage you to make that revision process as pleasant as possible. I'm reading a book right now. I think it's called Place Matters or Geography Matters. I think it's Place Matters. And one of the things they talk about how important place is in our lives. So give a pleasant setting to the writing. If writing is unpleasant for your kids, then I would say if it's cold, build a little fire in a fire pit outside. Get some hot chocolate or sit around the fireplace inside and make it fun. Make it a really intimate thing that you don't do all the time. If your kids never have popcorn and Coke, every once in a while say, hey, we got to edit this paper. Let's drink some Gatorade or a Coke, or if that's anathema in your house, I'm sorry. But I've got grandkids now, so I can do this every once in a while. But you want to reward them a little bit, or you want to encourage them with fun things in the process of the painful part of writing, which is really revision. Lizzie one time did a journal swap with one of her grandmothers. She couldn't decide what to give her for Christmas one year. I think she was 12 or 13. So she said, I know, Mom, I'm going to buy Grandmamie a journal. So she bought a journal and gave it to Grandmamie. And what she did was she just wrote a letter to her and then asked her a question. And she said, Grandmamie, I'm giving you the journal now. You write me a letter and you answer my question, write whatever you want to write, and then ask me a question. So they were able to swap this journal for many months. And that was a great gift. Another thing you can do is just teach your children to interview people. And if you heard the workshop on how important conversation is, when we would take field trips, each of our kids would write down 3 or 4 questions they would have to ask the people where we were going. So for some reason, the Craftsman Fair at Christmas time comes to mind. Both my boys were artistic and athletic, which was an unusual combination. And so I would have them choose an artisan to interview. How did you choose this craft? Why do you like it? How do you get better at this? How could I start? And then they could write, sometimes they would record it. Sometimes they would just remember it. Sometimes they would write down specific words. It just depended on their ages. But the art of interview is an important talent because in some ways, all of life is an interview. You're going to be interviewed to get into college. You're going to be interviewed for jobs. We need to teach our kids to ask interview type questions, and then they'll be more prepared to deal with that on their own. At Christmas time, there was a certain rendition of a Christmas carol that would come around in our theater, our Kroger Center, and we would take the kids every year to watch it. Then we might read the book and compare and contrast the two. Sometimes we did this like an oral essay. Other times we would do it in writing. And now with smartphones, you can have your child do a comparative analysis with a cell phone. Now, you can't do that with every writing assignment, but you can do that with some writing assignments. And if it's good enough, you can transcribe it. Write letters. Especially during COVID, if you're still having to shelter in place for some reason, Talk about people you want to write letters to, people in the military, people in assisted living facilities who can't have visitors, people in the hospital. Have your children write letters to them. And this is where you can really talk together and bond over how do you bless people with your words. Tell them something interesting that's going on in your life. Have the kids talk about what would that be if you had to tell them one interesting thing in your life. What would it be? Help them convert that into a paragraph. Some kids won't need help. Some kids will need help. And then help them ask questions like, how are you doing? Are you lonely? Do you need anything? And then have the children share a particular Bible verse that may be a family favorite or their favorite, or help them look up a Bible verse that's appropriate. And that way you're using these words to bless. Now, my suggestion to you is if your child is old enough to be embarrassed by a lot of errors, then go ahead and make them revise these letters. It can be painful, but you want them to know that when you send a letter to somebody, you want it to be proper or correct. You want it to be heartfelt, but you want the words to be spelled correctly. I can remember I got a thank you note for a wedding present. We'd given this girl, I'll call her Mary, her name was not Mary, a really nice pot, and it wasn't cheap. And so I get this thank you note back. Dear Mrs. Tyler, thank you for the pot. I love it. Mary. Well, that was a totally correct letter, but the content needed a little development. I didn't need to be thanked. I didn't give her the gift to be thanked, but I would want my children to write something about what they were going to do with the pot or what, that kind of thing. So as they're writing thank you notes, help them with their content and help them with their proofreading. It doesn't have to be a big deal where they end up upset. Just try to do it incrementally if they don't like revisions. Have them write thank you notes for Christmas presents they got to their grandparents or to you as parents, because if they're learning to write to you, then they will learn to write to others. Have them journal or write about celebrations in your home. Have them interview their grandparents and talk to their grandparents. You can do it with a recorder, and then you can transcribe that when you get home. You can transcribe it for them. If they're teenagers, they can probably do it for themselves, or you can pay somebody 20 cents a word or a sentence or something. Joe's always finding cheap transcriptionists for me. And so have them, it's family heritage and legacy. We have so much great video conversations that our kids had, especially with our granddads before they died. And my dad was 96 and Joe's dad is 96 and still going strong, driving, going to church, everything. So don't let those precious years go by without having your children interact with them and correspond with them. And the blessing will be mutual through this writing experience. Let's see, write a family newsletter. Now, this is something that's interesting because you can do this in a number of ways. You can have, let's say you just want to write a newsletter to go to the grandparents because you want the grandparents to know what your kids have been doing, but it's also a great way for the kids just to write and to have an audience. If you can give your child an audience, even if it's an audience of one to write for, it makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference in the way you take an assignment. If I had to write something and I knew nobody else was going to read it unless it was a personal journal entry, I would think, I don't have time for this. This is painful. Writing can be painful. And that's why we want to find positive ways to bond. But you can make it a big deal. You can make one child the editor, one child the graphic designer. You can make another child, responsible for finding the names and addresses, email addresses of people you want to send it to. If you're going to print it, you can find the snail mail addresses. So everybody can have a different job, but every child needs to write an article, even if it's with help. So those are fun things you can do as a family. So the point here is that you just want to find ways to bond with your children over writing. You want to take the drama and the tears out of it. You want to collaborate with them and teach them the thought process. As Robert Frost says, they have to learn how to have something to say when they speak and when they write. So we skip that step sometimes just because we think it's cheating to help them fill in the gaps of things they don't know or help them figure out what to write on. But just help them as much as they need until they don't need help anymore. And just a little caveat here. This is not the 3-paragraph essay or the 5-paragraph essay. Every child is going to have to do some academic writing at some point in their lives, and they need to learn that for college purposes, school purposes, business purposes, just how to be a constructive citizen and a productive citizen and a contributing citizen. But I just today wanted to take you underneath all of that and give you an idea of being a positive developmental editor in your child's life, helping them have something to say and helping them figure out how to get it on paper.